All right, let's get started. And it's always a good reminder to think about why we're doing this. So this is our whakatauaki, taumato arawai. Ko te wai hau, ko ahau te wai. He whakatōranga tātou no te wai. Ko te ora te wai, ko te ora o te tangata. He tonga te wai me te aki. Ko wai tātou, ko wai tātou. So today we'll cover just a quick introduction to what we're doing here and address an impending deadline and a quick summary of what the rules reporting contains, but then we're going to get straight into frequently asked questions. So this is questions that you guys have posed to us, feedback that you've given us, and we're taking on board in a continuous fashion. And I just want to say thank you for all of that. Without you guys, we can't make this process better. And yeah, without you guys, so we wouldn't be doing this. So just a thank you to everybody out there who's working very, very hard to get this reporting in, and we acknowledge that. So if you have questions or questions, Patai, use the webinar chat function for general questions on reporting. We won't be able to ask specific questions about your supply in here, but we have a plan for that. You can always get in touch with info@taumatarawai.govt.nz. Any questions about the rules go straight to Gabby and Shine, who's not here. And then if it's even trickier than that, it comes to me. So quick introduction. Our aim is to provide updates on the rules reporting based on your feedback and questions we've received. And this is for the people that are actually doing the reporting or supporting those who are doing the reporting. It's going to get real detailed real quick. We're just going to jump straight into it. So what you'll need is a basic, well, probably a little bit more advanced understanding of compliance with the rules, as well as the mechanisms of reporting. There's Excel versus API, which are essentially the same report. It's just the Excel is then converted into the API. And then you'll need to have read that drinking water quality assurance rules guidance for reporting. So this session will not cover a discussion on how that rule specifically applies to your supply. We just can't do that. We need to have those discussions one-to-one or with you as your role as a supplier. And it will not cover what to report for your specific supply. There are opportunities to do that by just getting in touch with us. For more information, you can refer to the webpage, which you should be able to click on, and you should be able to click on the email link as well if you want to email questions about your supply. Please get in touch. Lots of you have done that, and actually, it's not an annoyance. It actually helps us a lot, so please continue to do that. Quick summary of rules reporting. So this is just a really handy table on who reports what, because it just clarifies who reports what. So basically, if you're following the modules of very small communities, water carriers, services, or temporary drinking water supplies, or varying populations, you don't have to do that reporting. For level 1 modules, you don't have to report your assurance rules, but you do have to report your monitoring rules. And then level 2 and level 3 supplies have to report everything. And those are all according to rules G1 through G5. So there is a time frame and for this. So it's due within the annual report's due within 40 working days at the end of each calendar year. That is the 28th of February 2024. Some of you have gotten into contact with us, and we just thank you for doing that. If you have any issues, please contact your regulatory team based in your region. Yes, something I want to add there is that in March, we're working with Water NZ to set up some workshops. These will be online where you can talk about your specific supplies. We'll have breakout sessions and that kind of thing. So this is just in the planning stages, but we need to plan those quite quickly. So that is one of my top priorities, actually. The use of the data by Te Matarawai is to draw information from Hinokrako for our reporting that we have to do. It's to inform our understanding of drinking water safety and risk, and it's to help prioritize our regulatory activities. So water suppliers are responsible for ensuring data submitted to us is correct, and as well as any other information in Hinokrako. So why has there been an update to this guidance? Look, we have some complex rules. They're not always quite clear how you would report those. And some rules have required clarifications. So we acknowledge that, the rules, they are what they are. There's definitely clarifications that are needed. But we want to make them better. We want to make the reporting better. And so we want to implement quality checks to make sure that our data quality that we're collecting is actually usable. And so to do that, we have to do these types of checks. And so what we've produced are some rule clarifications, some guidance for reporting, a rules summary list, which I'll go into a little bit because it's actually really, really useful. If you're reporting via Excel, it's extremely useful. It's also should be very useful to Lutra and Water Outlook. The parameter and determinant list, so this is kind of an official list of all the parameter determinants in the standards, the rules, and the aesthetic values, and then a reporting template. So what do you report on? One of the rules many of the rules have multiple requirements. So an example of this is T1.8 has 3 main requirements to test for E. coli, total coliforms, and turbidity. So we've split that up into 3 separate rules that you need to report on, and that is where you report on it. So we actually got rid of the reporting rule ID that was just T1.8, and you just report on those specific requirements. This specific rule, you actually need to go see the rule clarifications for that. And we sent out a newsletter earlier telling everybody we could that we have updated the rule clarifications in the end of December. So please check that out again if you haven't already. Okay, so this is one way to report. You may also report through Lutra or Water Outlook. The links there are live, and you should be able to flick around and go back. This is a view from Lutra's, this is Hinokrako, and you can generate an API key for infrastructure data or Water Outlook, or you can report via the Excel file. And I'm hoping I'm going to convince you that this rule summary list is your new best friend. If not, maybe Gabby can convince you. So I just want to share that with you and show you why it could be your new best friend. Just might take me a second to find what I need to find. Sorry, I've run into technical difficulties. I won't be able to share that. So sad. We tested it before, but I think when externals are in the meeting, it doesn't work. So I'll have to go back. But maybe I can show you from this. So what you can do here is set up this as a filter or a table, and you can basically filter out, say you just want to bring up the G rules, okay? You can bring up just the G rules. That last column there that says rule applies, maybe you're following the T2 module. If you type in T2 there and search for T2, it'll bring up all the rules that are applicable to T2. And then you would copy paste the IDs into your Excel report and fill out your supply components. You might have to recopy and paste for each of those supply components or each of your treatment plants, but you can pretty quickly populate a list of rules that apply to your supply using your supply components. And then you have the work of going through and filling that out. All right, I will move on to frequently asked questions because I've talked long enough. Gabby, hand over to you.
So just to control, Tenakoto. Hi, everybody. Great to have you here today again, virtually. Um, I'm going to cover the main frequently asked questions that we received, but there is a lot of them. And as Noah said, thank you so much for sending this through. And thank you as well for sending feedback when you find something that needs a correction or something that needs further clarification, because we are going to use all this feedback to update the guidance on reporting and also to update the rules. Hopefully later this year, we are going to start the rules update, and we are already working the next version of the guidance. So that's really great. And just a reminder again that we all have the same goal in mind, which is ensuring that everybody has safe drinking water every day, and we need to keep collaborating to ensure that that happens. So I have lots of questions to cover today, so bear with me. But if you have any questions in the meanwhile, just send them through the chat. So let's do that. So first question, there are two Excel templates for reporting. Which one should I use? Okay, so for all the monitoring rules, you are always going to use the DWQAR reporting template. So either for your monthly, quarterly, 6-monthly, or annual reports, if you are reporting manually, of course. So always this template. Now for the assurance rules, if you have to report for assurance rules, you know that they are reported just annually. And then you have two options here. You can either include your assurance rules together with your monitoring rules in the reporting template, or you can use the separate template that we have for assurance rules, which is the DWQAR assurance rules template. So the only difference of the assurance rules template is that it doesn't have the samples tab in this template, because there's no assurance rules that requires samples to be reported. So that's the only difference. So you just use this assurance rules template if you want to separate your assurance rules, and that's all. You don't have to use it if you don't want to. Now, next question. When do I need to supply data or data points related to online instruments to Tomata ROI? Okay, so there are three different situations when you might use continuous monitoring, and I'm going to talk about each one of them. So the first one is for some T2, S3, T3, or D3 rules that require continuous monitoring as the only option for that rule. So you don't have any other option. So for example, if you go to table 19 of the rules, you can see that FEC and pH have to be continuous monitored for bacterial disinfection with chlorine. So in this case, no rules that only require continuous monitoring with no other option need you to submit any data points or any data for these rules. And again, if you go to that summary list that Noah has just shown you, that's super, super helpful, because for each rule ID, you can see exactly if samples need to be submitted for that rule ID or not. So checked it out for sure. Now, the second situation is for some T1, S2, T2, and S3 rules. So when grab samples are expected, and you even have a sample frequency there, um, some of you have contacted us in the past about these rules and said, hey, I have online instruments, can I use them to replace these grab samples? And we have told you that yes, you can use it. Like, continuous monitoring is great, it's super helpful. It helps you with process control, it helps you with setting up alarms. So we don't want to discourage that in any way. So for sure, you can use your continuous monitoring equipment to replace these grab samples in this for these particular rules. And in this case, you still have to submit randomized data points in the samples tab to replace what would be the grab samples. So you just enter them in the sample step, the same way that you would enter any grab sample result. But when you select these data points, make sure that there's no cherry picking, please. Be conservative with your data point selection, but actually if you just randomize them, you should be all right. So just make sure that your data points really represent your data. And just a reminder as well that anytime that you use continuous monitoring, the G rules that apply to continuous monitoring apply in this case. So you need to comply with them. And the third situation here is when continuous monitoring is officially allowed as an option to grab samples. So it's different from the other one because the other one we just told you verbally or in writing that you can use continuous monitoring. But in this case, it's when you actually have an option there, either continuous monitoring or grab samples. And I just found two situations in the rules when this happens, which is for the T2 rules when it tells you to do monitoring of UVI or UV dose. So in this case, if you go to table 14 of the rules, you can see there, it says that you need to do sampling twice a week, but note 25 says that you can use continuous monitoring. So in this case, if you use continuous monitoring, it's similar to the other situation. Rather than submitting grab samples, you are going to submit randomized data points, and the same things apply here. Please, no cherry picking, make sure the data points are representative, make sure you comply with the G rules that apply to continuous monitoring, and you should be all right. And the only other situation when this happens is for the D3 rules about FAC grab samples for the distribution network. So if you remember, in this case, you have two options. Either you use grab samples for FAC in the network, or you can use online analyzers as well for your FAC in the network. And in this particular case, if you choose to use the online analyzers for FAC sample in your network, you are not expected to submit any data or data points related to that rules, to those rules. And again, just go to the summary list and it's going to tell you exactly if you need to submit samples or not. So that is very useful. Now, next question. Can I report on rules more frequently? Well, ideally, no. We have rules G1 to G5 that specify the time frames for each particular rule, and we would prefer that you'd follow these ones as much as possible. We know that some of you contacted us in the past and asked, oh, can I report more frequently? And we said, yeah, okay, you can do that. And if you have set up your system to do this, it's okay. You don't have to change this now. But as much as possible, please follow rules G1 to G5 about when to report on each specific rule. So this means just include in the annual report the rules that have to be there, and just include in your monthly, quarterly, or 6 monthly reports the rules that have to be there as much as possible. Next one. Can I correct my report, and how does that work? Yes, of course, you can correct your report. Of course, as well, when you submit it for the first time, make sure it's correct as much as possible, because we can use the data at any point, right? And when we use it, we are going to assume it is correct. So always try your best to make sure it's correct. But if you happen to have committed any mistakes, that's all good. You can correct it either through the APIs or through the Excel spreadsheets as well. So if you want to correct something, you don't need to resubmit the home report. If you want, you can just submit the rule IDs that you want to correct. So in this case, if these rule IDs that you want to correct have any sample requirements, just make sure that you resubmit the samples as well. Just remember that this is going to overwrite what you have submitted before, so the samples need to be resubmitted as well. Make sure the start date and the end date are correct for the report, and it should be all good. So when we look at your data, you are going to look at the most recent submission for each particular rule for that period. Okay, can you change my report, you being us, Tomataroi, for example, a non-compliance to a compliance, if I tell you what needs to be corrected? Um, Unfortunately, no, we can't change your report for you. Imagine the crazy liability for us if you're going to do that. We just can't do that. But you are welcome to do so. You can correct your reports at any time through API or Excel. Um, can I report on rules other than those rules stipulated by G1 to G5? For example, if I am a level 1 supply and I'm not supposed to report on assurance rules, can I do so? Or if varying population rules apply to my supply, I don't have to report on them, but can I? Or if I am a water carrier, I don't have to report on anything, can I report? In these particular cases, when you're not required to report for a particular rule, you can still report if you'd like. Just note that you are not required to at this stage. But if you want, you can find the rule IDs for these rules in that amazing summary list, that Excel spreadsheet again. So just use these rule IDs to report on additional rules that you didn't have to report on. Should I submit one report for each supply component? Um, so if you don't remember, a supply component is each water intake for your water supply, or each water source, water treatment plant, or each distribution zone as well. So we recommend that the best thing would be submitting one report for the whole supply with all the supply components rather than one report per supply component, because that's going to be a lot of reports. But yeah, that's just our recommendation. And why should I pay attention to the guidance? Yes, well, the guidance is not legal or technical advice about your specific supply, but it tells you how we interpret the rules and how we would like to see you report. So definitely take it seriously as much as possible, read it again and again, and we are going to be committed to make the guidance better and better based on your feedback as well. Do I need to report on G rules for each supply component? So again, questions like this just go back to the summary list because it tells you exactly for each rule. Does this rule need a supply component ID? Yes or no? Um, when the rule doesn't need a supply component, it means that you are reporting for that rule for the whole supply. And when it needs a supply component, of course, you are reporting on that rule for each specific supply component. So for rules G1 to G12, you leave the supply component ID. So these rules are reported, or you leave it blank, sorry. So these rules are reported for the whole supply. Now, we are aware that there is a problem in our system at the moment with these rules. If you try to report and you got an error, you are going to know about this. So when people are leaving the supply component ID field blank for rules G1 to G12 at the moment, you are getting an error in our system, and I'm sorry for that. We have a home team working hard to fix this issue, and we are going to fix it as soon as possible. So don't freak out if you get an error. You are doing the right thing if you are leaving the supply component ID blank for rules G1 to G12. Now, for rules G13 to G17, these ones do need a supply component ID for each time that you report on these rules. And these rules are mostly related to continuous monitoring. So if any continuous monitoring is required for that supply component, so that's when you are going to report on that rule for that particular supply component. If no continuous monitoring is required at all for that supply component in any rules, so this is not applicable to that supply component, so you don't report for the supply component ID. And how do I report on rules that do not apply to my supply? Well, you don't. You don't need to include rules in your report that don't apply to your supply, but just make sure that they actually don't apply to your supply. So for example, coming back to the continuous monitoring thing, so if you are required to have an online analyzer for something, but you haven't installed it yet, so actually the rule applies to you, but you are non-compliant at the moment, so you report false. Now, if it's a rule that really has nothing to do with your supply, so that's when you don't need to include this rule in your report. So for example, in the S2 rules, you know that we have some roof water rules. So if you don't have any roof water as a source for your supply, you don't need to include roof water rules in your report. Another example is for T3 rules. So you know that UV equipment can be used for both bacterial and protozoa disinfection or just protozoa disinfection. So if you are just using your UV units for protozoa disinfection, you don't need to include the rules related to bacterial disinfection with UV units in your report because they are not applicable in this case. Next one, can I record the standard method which was used to test a sample? So you know that for some determinants, there are different standard methods that can be used. For example, acid soluble or total. And yes, multiple standard methods might be appropriate for one particular determinant. And if you want, you can add to the note in the sample to say which standard method you used. But this is not mandatory, just if you want. And for sample reports, what units can I report in? So apart from that summary list, we also have another amazing Excel spreadsheet, which is the parameter determinant list. And if you go to this spreadsheet, you're going to see that for each parameter or determinant, it tells you exactly which units you can use. And please just report with these units that are accepted. And it's important to note that for nitrate and nitrate, there are two commonly used units. And if you remember that there are even two MEV values for them because of these two units. So one is milligram per liter as nitrogen, and the other one is milligram per liter as nitrate or nitrate. So these units are not equivalent, so make sure you enter the right one, otherwise we don't know what you have tested for. Quite important. Do I report fact grab samples against D3.19 and D3.20? So this was another error in our summary list. I'm sorry for that. We are going to fix it as soon as we can. So fact grab samples for D3 distribution network are only supposed to be reported annually against D3.20 and not monthly against D3.19. And you are not supposed to report the same samples twice as well. Now, if you have reported the FAC grab samples for your distribution network monthly for 2023 under D3.19, that's all good. It was our bad. So you don't need to submit the same samples again in your annual report under D3.20 because it was our bad. But going ahead, please make sure that you just report these fact samples for your distribution network just under D3.20 annually. And we are going to fix that. All right, next one. if my sample exceeds a MEV, do I report that I failed the rule report? So not necessarily. So remember, the rules are mostly about the frequency with which you have to sample something and not the result itself. So the requirements for treated water determinants not to exceed the MEVs is in the Water Service Act and actually not in the rules. So if you met the frequency for sampling, you can report as true for some of the rules. Now, when you go to the sample tab and you are actually reporting the samples, if it's a treated water sample, then you can report false if that result exceeded the MEV. And if it didn't exceed the MEV, you can report that particular sample as true. But yes, just for the rule itself, it's about the frequency. Now, we recognize as well that we might have said something different for some of you in the past. So yeah, this is a new interpretation um, of the rules, and actually it's better for you, I guess, because if you met the frequency, you can still report that you are compliant, and that's what the rule is about. Another very popular question, what are the compliance period for S rules and how do I report on compliance with the source water rules and their samples? So again, summary list, great one to answer this kind of question. And if you go there to the summary list and you filter by source water rules, you are going to see that most source water rules do not have a compliance period. I know it is weird. It says not applicable for lots of the compliance periods for the source water rules. So in this case, because there is no compliance period, when you report for that rule, you always enter 0 in the non-compliance period field, even if you are reporting false, non-compliant, which is really strange, right? Every other time that you report false, you have to say how many non-compliance periods you have not complied with, but not in this case because there are no non-compliance periods. So always put 0 there. And if you don't put 0 there, your report's gonna fail. And I also acknowledge that the guidance is wrong in this and we are gonna fix it. Now, for source water samples, MEVs don't apply to source water samples because they are not treated water, right? So if you have, for example, a source water sample with high arsenic, hopefully your treatment is going to remove that arsenic and then the treated water is going to have arsenic that's under the MEV. So for source water, you always report all those samples as true in the samples tab. Now, treated water, yeah, you report them as true or false, depending if they exceed the MEV or not. We are getting there. Let's go. When a week is split across 2 months, how should I report on rules with monthly compliance periods that require weekly sampling? Another popular question. So as you know, we have weekly sample requirements for some parameters. However, the compliance period tends to be monthly. So in that case, people ask us, what do I do with the first week of the month and the last week of the month because they are split across 2 months, 2 compliance periods. So you can choose to, when a week is split across 2 months, you can choose to add it to this monthly compliance period or to the next one. It's your choice, but whatever you do, just make sure that you are consistent from one report to the next. So always do the same thing. Uh, and I can give you a heads up that we are aiming to eliminate this in the next version of the rules. So this means that we would align the sampling frequency requirements with the compliance period. So rather than asking you, for example, for 2 samples a week, we are going to ask you for 8 samples a month. And then this will eliminate this need to figure out what to do with the first week of the month and the last week of the month. I became compliant with a rule in the middle of the compliance period. Can I report compliance for that period? Unfortunately, no, but you are improving your water supply. Congratulations, that's really good. So For example, the examples are going to help us with this one. So the rule D3.12 requires a storage management plan to be prepared and implemented, right? So this is a rule that has a 1-year compliance period. So if you prepared your storage management plan for a supply around August last year, for example. So unfortunately, this storage management plan was not in place since the beginning of the compliance period, which would be one of the 1st of January of 2023. So because of that, for the 2023 year, you have to report false for this rule. However, for the next annual report, 2024, you already are going to have the storage management plan in place and working amazing and really controlling the risk in your network. So next year you can report true. So that's going to be great. And another example would be for rule T2.3 for a level 2 supply. So this rule requires a filtration system to be installed for level 2 supplies. So if you just installed it, for example, in September last year, because this rule has a 1-year compliance period, you are not compliant since the beginning of the period. So unfortunately, you have to report false as well. But next year, hopefully, 2024, annual report, you are going to be true in everything. I really believe in you. Now, change in population. How do I report if the number of people in my supply increases or decreases, leading to a change in the classification of the supply? So let's say that your supply has 85 people, so a level 1 supply, and then there's a new development, the houses are built, people start moving in, and then suddenly your supply has 120 people. So now you are a level 2 supply. So how do you report? What do you do? So if you prefer, for changes in population, we will allow you to make the changes in reporting for from 1st of Jan, so you can wait until the next year, and then it might be easier for you if you do that. So you just make the changes in your reporting rules from the 1st of January. Now, alternatively, if you prefer, then you can submit 2 annual reports, and also you can submit 2 reports in case the change happened in the middle of a period covered by a monthly report or a quarterly report or a 6-monthly report. If you prefer to do that, just make sure that the start date and the end date for each report is correct, and just that is acknowledging the change that happened and when that change happened. And our system will be able to process these reports with different dates. It's all good, so it's your choice there. And deactivated a new supply component. How do I report on a supply component that has been deactivated or created in Hinekoraku? For example, a bore that has been decommissioned in the middle of the reporting period, or a new treatment that was installed, etc. So we are changing our system at the moment so that you are going to be able to report on both active and inactive supply components as well, to be able to address this. So if you get an error at the moment, don't freak out as well. We are working hard to fix this so you can report on supply component IDs that have been deactivated. Now, just a note that deactivating a supply component should be done just when that supply component is really not going to be used anymore, permanently or for a long period. So, for example, a water treatment plant that was decommissioned and you're not going to use it anymore. Okay, great, let's deactivate that supply component. Or maybe a water intake that is going to go through some works and is going to be out of service for many months. So you can deactivate this one, and then we are going to reactivate it when it's working again. And then it's the same case here with these supply components that are created or are deactivated. You can submit 2 annual reports and 2 monthly or quarterly or 6-monthly reports for the period when the change happened, and then just make sure that the start and the end date for each report, that they match when the change was made, and our system will be able to process these reports with different dates as well. I think I'm probably going to skip this to give us some time for questions. And then if we have time, I'll go back to those last ones. So awesome. We covered most of them. Now, if you want to come back, we can address any patai now, any questions.
I've been addressing some as we go, because I can do that in the chat. So it doesn't look like we have. We'll be getting them in.
Yeah, so if you have any other questions, you can send them through. So maybe while you look now, if you have any other questions, I can go back to that, to
Yeah,
those two last questions. So one of my treatment process, which has compliant requirements, was only operated for 1 hour out of the whole month. Do I have to report on it? Yes, you do have to report on it. So if any equipment was online for just 1 hour in the month, you still have to report on it. And this is applicable, for example, for standby equipment. If you have a standby UV unit, if it comes online for 1 month, so you have to consider that UV unit for your compliance together with the rest of your UV system. And this one is in UV units. Are we expected to perform monthly UVI sensor checks on UV reactors which are not in operation? So no, you don't have to. There are no specific requirements about this. However, make sure that you always maintain and operate your UV units according to the manufacturer's specifications and also instructions. So if they tell you that you need to undertake a UV sensor check before bringing your reactor back online after a certain time that it has been offline, just make sure that you do that. But if your UV unit operated during any time in the month, again, so a UV sensor check must be undertaken. So in this case, if you have UV units in standby, it might be easier to just do the monthly check every month anyway, because you might bring them online at any time. And then let's say you did your UVI sensors check yesterday, and then today for some reason you need to bring this UV unit online, and now your next check is just scheduled for next month, and your contractor cannot come to site to do it again this month. So you'd have to be non-compliant there. So it's better practice if you have units in standby to just do it every month anyway. But if they are in standby and they are not brought online for any time during the month, there's no requirements in the rule to do this check. All right, now I really covered all my questions. Any other patai to address?
Yes, we have a question from Liz. Is there a plan to change reporting to monthly rather than annual? Kind of making a point that I think for you guys, it would be easier to have a realistic view on your compliance, more regular intervals. So I think it's a really important distinction to make is this reporting and the requirements are for Taumata Harawai. And so if you have your own internal reporting requirements, that's yours to own. So there's nothing stopping you from looking at compliance more frequently. Granted, I understand that having systems aligned makes sense. So we will look into that, and there may be things that actually we find we want some more monthly reports on these rules which have monthly reporting periods. So we get that. But I would definitely encourage you to look at your requirements and the rules more frequently than annually. We have another question on T3.93 STAN and T3.93 LLEV. So this is where you have to go and sample a whole bunch of things. So you have to do a 12-month program, take 15 samples, and she's just wondering where you actually submit those samples. So if for that sampling program, if you have identified your samples as standard and not elevated, you would submit on all those samples under T3.93-STAN. There's no D in that reporting rule, just clarifying that. And then if you had elevated requirements, you would put your elevated determinants under that one. Okay. I know that's a little bit confusing, so I will definitely update that in the guidance and make sure it's really, really clear.
And just a reminder as well that when we have a rule ID like this that doesn't specify what's the name of the determinant in the rule ID itself, there's a place in the samples tab where you write the name of the parameter that you are reporting against. So make sure you write there what's the parameter or determinant, otherwise we have no idea what you are reporting for or what that result is about.
That's a really good point, and we haven't implemented that check yet because we didn't want to overburden you with yeah, even more checks than are already performed at the moment. So yeah, but that will be an important data quality check for us. So if you can help us out and just get that right, that'd be really, really good. Simon, I said I wouldn't ask any supply specific issues, but generally, if you've entered in terms of the source water compliance periods, if there's no compliance period, we're not going to look at those non-compliant periods. It's just you have to have a value in there. So don't worry about resubmitting in that specific instance, especially if it got accepted. So. Yeah, it's a good question on T3.92. I would like to see all the 15 samples from that program because you can't really do the analysis until you have those 15 samples. So I think I can justify that being submit all those 15 samples or more. You might have taken more. And that way we can do that verification check that you've done the monitoring you need to do. Again, we haven't done that yet. We haven't implemented that, but there are plans to do these types of things. From Fraser. Thanks for that question, Fraser. We have a question from Levi. That's a good question. Levi, we'll get back to you on that one. My initial thoughts are that if you have an inactive board, nope, I need to get back to you on that one. If we get back to Levi, we will definitely include that one in the new updated guidance as well, so that everybody gets that feedback. Yeah. Gabby, do you want to address Ann's S3.4 rule? I think you've answered that since.
Yes, so for any rule that has a compliance period, for example, the 1 year rule, 1 year compliance period. So as we were saying, if you became compliant in the middle of that compliance period, so unfortunately you are not compliant for this annual report. So yes, if you need that sample for the last 10 years, if in the first like 5 years, for example, you didn't have a valid sample for that, so unfortunately you have to report false. But then next year you have sampled for all of them, and then hopefully you can report true for everything. So it's gonna be awesome. No, wait, I have to correct myself.
Yes.
No. If you report, maybe we have to have a think about this one.
I think we need to have a think about this one.
Yeah.
The rules only came in to effect
No.
November 15th.
Mm, 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 mm. No. So sorry. Remove what I said. So applicable to the 1 year compliance rules for the 10 years. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I don't think we should do that. Yeah, we'll get back
Yeah.
to you, Ainsley. We have been.
Most likely you'll have 10 years to take that sample.
Yeah, this one would be better. Mm.
That doesn't stop you from taking a sample sooner than that if you need to manage that risk, but generally these things change over long periods of time. We have a question from UU, unknown user. Where manufacturer's specification on calibration refers to drinking water standards and the standards refer to manufacturer specifications, would an industry standard be acceptable? You'd have to ask the manufacturer on that one. And if they're being a bit cagey, just keep pushing them. Yeah, that's probably a specific scenario that we'd have to deal with. So if you have that specific scenario, just email through to info@. Another one from an unknown user, D3.20 recovers porting of number of samples, days between samples and days of week for FAC. There is no equivalent rule for E. coli reporting, but there are similar requirements. Where do we report on compliance with E. coli frequency and days requirement? Yep, so I'm just gonna go straight to my rule summary list. I know some of you probably have memorized the rules list. I have not. Pull up my handy summary list. And I'll just pull up all my D3 rules. I wish I could really show you what I'm doing right now to show you how handy it is. And so D3.29-ECOL is where you would report against that. It's kind of the equivalent of D320. So I think this question might go down to how you submit samples. What you'll do is you'll submit per distribution zone. You'll submit one reporting rule ID on D3.29-ECOL and D3.29-COLI for your E. coli and total coliforms. And you'll need to submit a rule report on that. That's that high level, in the Excel template, it's the section 2, that's that line item there. And if you complied with that, you can say true. Even if you got a positive E. coli, because we capture that through other means. And then in your samples, so those samples are actually underneath that rule report. So you shouldn't be able to submit if you don't have a rule report on something that you have a sample report on. So you always have to have a rule report on a reporting rule ID if you have samples underneath it. Otherwise, you'll get rejected. Muzayin, hopefully I said that correctly. Apologies if I didn't. Yep, so the annual report is due February 28th. If you can't make that deadline, just please get in touch with your regional team. We certainly have discretion on how we address missed deadlines and that type of thing. And so you just really need to get in touch with your regional team on that one. In terms of what do I report on, you'll have to read the guidance for that. And I would really recommend you watch the first webinar the second webinar and maybe rewatch this webinar. But also you'll need to read the guidance probably a couple times because it is a meaty document. And you can focus on level 3 if you have a level 3 supply. So I would do that first, but you can submit an annual report fully in Excel. For a level 3 supply, that's going to be a lot of work. So we really do encourage, if you have multiple supplies, especially level 3, you really should be considering API and how you submit on that. Tony Dawson, what do we submit for items that have 3-year testing? Yeah, so with this one, this is similar to the 10-year requirement. As long as you have a plan to take it in the next 3 years, well, now in the next 2, that's fine. And so when the 4th year, well, when the 3rd year comes along, you will have needed to sample something at that stage. I would include that as a, yep, we're going to comply because we have a planned sampling program to do this within 3 years. Or in a 3-year rotation cycle.
And for sure, we'll clarify these requirements that are 3 years and 10 years in the guidance as well. So thank you for your feedback. That's really good.
And as you can see in here, it's even made us just think about our position, adjust that to make sure that it's actually sound. So this is, you can kind of see that continuous improvement process in place. Yep, so Julie, I've explained that D3.29-ECOL does is comparable to D3.20-ECOL. So you can't actually submit on D3.29 or D3.20 as an ID. You have to use the reporting rule ID, the summary list. Those reporting rule IDs are the ones you need to use for that. The reason we took those away, I think there was 1 or 2 cases where we might not have, we probably shouldn't have taken that away. I think rule 3.1 is one of those cases where there's actually a requirement that's higher level. But D3.29, D3.20, those can be separated into their E. coli and total call forms equivalents. Otherwise, people didn't know which one to report under. Do you report under D3.29 or do you report under D3.29-ECOL? Well, we just got rid of the D3.29, and if you did all your coli sampling, then you can say true for that one. If you did all your total call form sampling, you can say that you complied with D3.29 total call forms. So I think this is a really good example of where we're trying to be fair, because in the past you would have gotten a coli and you would have been labeled non-compliant. Here we'll be looking at compliance rates, and so even one missed sample, if you have hundreds over the year, you're going to be at 99.5% compliance. We're still working out how to do those calculations, but that is kind of where we're heading. So I can give you a glimpse into the future on that. Good question on false. If you didn't use enough days of the week during the whole year, you're going to have to report false on that one. Really, you do have to think these things through from the before your sampling program begins. So, but hey, this year you'll be onto it, and we'll see that market improvement, and we'll be like, ooh, this supplier is doing really well and improving their supply. And then there was a question prior to that. So how do we incorporate the total days of the week and the total numbers of Saturdays and Sundays into the monthly reporting? You don't have to, because you're actually only monthly reporting on D3.19. So hopefully that actually makes things easier. You don't have to submit samples monthly. you're just saying, yep, I'm at the 85% target and I haven't dropped below 0.1. So no samples need to go with D3.19, acknowledging that there was one or two things I missed in the summary list, and that was one of them, unfortunately, but we will get that updated. Right now, we're not performing any checks on samples, but we will implement those checks. Once we've gotten all your feedback, summarize that, we'll put that out with new guidance. So, and we'll let you know that we're doing that. Steph Marshall, just reading your question now. This is a bit of a tricky one for me because the rules were in force since the beginning of the year, and there were no rules prior requiring that. Can you please, Steph, if you just send that to info@, I think we need to take a look at your specific supply on that one. My tendency would be, it's a new requirement, so you probably should have taken those 15 samples recently, but we might consider the last year or two, and just, I think we'll need to chat about that specifically. If anybody else is in that situation, please get in touch. We don't want you to ignore your previous monitoring because that is useful monitoring to have, but if it's 10 years old, that's probably too old. Yeah. But again, get in touch so that we can address your specific situation there. For S3.6, where a suite of samples have been identified and one of them was missed. Yep, due to labs not being able to do the testing. Again, with this one, please get in touch. I think this is a specific one and depends on your specific circumstances. Unless Gabby, you have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, it is a tough one. So what some councils are doing, and specifically for FAC samples in the network, for example, is always sampling one extra sample. Like that's great care. And mostly when something as easy as FAC that you can just, your operator can do it on site with their calibrated, amazing equipment. It's always good to do more rather than less, and then you can ensure that you are always compliant there. Yeah, but if the lab missed a sample, unfortunately, I would say you'd have to report non-compliant for the frequency for this one. I think that's where we have landed on Noah with this kind of queries.
For when a lab misses a sample, I think this is one where a lab hasn't actually been able to do the sampling. So yeah, it's a bit tricky. There are labs, I know there are labs out there that can do all the standards testing. And so it might be a matter of some systems and processes to get samples shipped off to a different lab. However, we don't want to discourage you from doing that sampling because it's quite a good practice to do, and I don't want to discourage that. So please get in touch. That would be good. And again, we'll update guidance if out of any of these kind of supplier to Taumat.RY conversations, we will apply them fairly to everyone by putting that in the guidance. Philippa, you have a question on if we have results that cover 3.4, table 17, pre-November 22, can these be submitted for compliance? So let me get out my handy copy of the rules, go to 3.4. Yes, you may. So this is a 10-year requirement for if you have samples, definitely, yep, submit them, and then you won't have to submit a sample for another 10 years. And you can tick true every year from now till then. Okay. Liz, you mentioned we are still compliant if, okay. I did not mention if you are compliant if you're over the MAV. If you breached a MAV, you breached the standards and have to notify us. So just want to clarify that. So we receive, water suppliers are required to notify us if a MAV is exceeded, or if the drinking water may or be is or may be unsafe. So that's a separate reporting mechanism. That's through notifying us through Hinakarako portal, and those come to us and we respond immediately to those. And it's really important that we respond immediately to those, and it's really important that you respond immediately to those. Rules reporting isn't set up for that because you're kind of reporting at intervals, and an annual report, you know, if you haven't notified us something that we should have been notified of, we'll catch that. We'll have a talk to you about why you didn't do that. If you have done it, great. That's a great thing, because those are the types of things we will check with this type of thing.
Yes.
So you are compliant with the rule. There's no rule in the rules that says you have to meet a MAV. That's the act. And so it's kind of higher level than the rules. And again, this is for our reporting, right? We want to know that you've sampled at the enough samples at the right frequency with the right duration in between and the right days. That's what we want to know from that reporting. And hopefully that's useful for your own internal purposes as well, to kind of make that distinguishment. So yeah, we would report on notifications separately. So if you've submitted a notification, then we can use that information separately to the rules reporting. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
so
hope
there
that's
are
answered your question, Liz.
there are three things, right? Different things. There is non-compliance with the Water Service Act, there is non-compliance with a specific rule, and there is non-compliance with a sample, a specific sample. So you might be compliant with the rule if you met the frequency of sampling, but then one of your samples might be non-compliant for treated water. And if your sample is not compliant, you are not compliant with the Water Service Act as well. And just a reminder that that's not true for source water samples. All your source water samples are always compliant because they are not treated water. Hopefully, anything that exceeds the MAV there is going to be removed through your amazing treatment process, and then your treated water samples hopefully are going to be compliant.
We have another question from Rebecca McFarland. Will compliance statuses be shared publicly? If so, what level of information will be shared? I can't answer that question fully. However, I can say that in a recent newsletter we've sent you, there will be some information that's displayed back to you in your portal. This will become live on February 27th or 8th. I can't remember the exact date, but watch the end of the month. Certainly in March, you'll have access to this table, and we will use that in our drinking water regulation report to some extent. And we're still shaping up how that report's going to look. We will also be looking at compliance rates. So we'll display that to you first, and then we'll report on it. So you have a chance to provide feedback, and we'll communicate with you at the kind of proper time to do that. But again, it will be, you know, non-compliant periods divided by the number of total periods, compliance periods, right? So if you missed one compliance period, so you were non-compliant for one compliance period, and maybe it's a monthly compliance period, you'll be 11 out of 12 compliant. I don't know what that is off the top of my head. 9.92%. But then that's just one rule, right? So we have to work out how we actually report that. We'll be focusing on the monthly, quarterly, and 6-monthly results that you've been reporting last year. I think we've addressed that one. Julie, you have a question on T3.92. And it says that no samples are expected, so it doesn't seem, no. So T3.93-STAN and T3.93-ELEV, it's standing for elevated. Those are where you would report your 15 samples for the determinants that you tested for. So T3.92 is more about the program, and so you would report that you've done that program. You might have started I'll have to think about this one actually before I shout it off. You really should have started that program from January. However, it might have taken you a bit longer. So as long as you're still progressing with that program, just submit the samples that you've taken so far. And I'm fine if you submit true on that. Gabby, can we just mark that down that I said that?
All right.
If you started at least within the year, I think that's a fair call. That I'm willing to make live on TV. So T3.92, if one determinant of the suite is over 50% of the MAV, do we have to test all determinants in suite at higher frequency or just the one? Oh, certainly just the one. And that's the beauty of a risk-based approach to chemical sampling. You only have to test for the things that that are a risk and that you've confirmed are a risk. So please do that. We don't want to mandate. Well, we could mandate you test for everything, similar to how the US does it. Not sure our labs could cope with that, but we want you guys to be owning your risks and really nailing down what are those hazards in your catchment, what should you be sampling for. Yes, so T3.93, it says samples may be submitted, and this might be slightly deceiving. So that just means when we do our checks, you might not have done that program, and we have to think about the future, right? And the future of reporting. So certainly this year we'd be expecting some samples, but next year you've already done that program. You might retest again, right? To try to get back down to the standard and do some investigation, and you find, oh, actually it's not as big of a risk. You'll have to have some rationale and reasoning behind that, but you can redo that program for a specific determinant or a specific group of determinants to then qualify it back down. So you're not stuck there forever, unless it's a forever problem, and then you probably should be sampling forever if it's a forever problem until you fixed it. So for T3.93, that all that means is that we either expect, we may or may not expect samples, right? We're not going to do a check that samples are required against this rule or samples are not required against this rule. We'll just kind of leave it open for you to submit. So that's, yeah. That's the explanation of that. Probably does need to be clarified in the guidance, so we'll add that to the list as well. Have I gotten through everybody's questions? Well, I really hope this was a useful session. I would like to just take a poll, and we're actually at time, aren't we? So I'd like to just, can they raise their hands? Hoping they can raise their hands. If you'd be interested in a kind of a Water in Z Taumata ROI workshop, on rules reporting where you can, go into breakout sessions online with an advisor, with me. Would you be interested in that? It's enough for one workshop.
Yeah, this is gonna help us with numbers and
Yeah.
to plan how many workshops we need, so we can make sure that we have
Right.
nice breakout groups, not full
Yep.
of people, so we can really help you with your particular problems.
Cool. I think we have quite a few people interested, and maybe more would be interested. If the stars align. Okay. Thanks for that. And yeah, maybe I'll hand back to you, Gabby, if you want to say any final thoughts.
No, that's good. Again, thank you everybody for submitting your questions and feedback. Without this, we cannot make the rules better. We cannot make the guidance better. We are learning a lot with you as well. And we'll keep improving things as well. And I know you are doing your best. We are doing our best. Everybody is doing their best with the time and the resources they have available. So yeah, just keep in touch with your questions, and yeah, we'll just keep improving, everybody improving together.
Thanks so
Awesome.
much. Kakite.
Kakite, everybody.